It's never been more important to find your pack. In Friday Night Lights terms, that's clear eyes, especially clear eyes about yourself, turned inwards. You tighten your circle. You watch your mouth in public. You help your circle. It means you don't rat. Without exception, every note I've written, I end up in a different place. The act of writing changes your views and where you are. The act of writing now for the last 13 years, I am in a very different place than when I started. There is an economy of good. What I am is a herald. I think I can be someone who can walk between two worlds, right? This semantic world of meaning and the real world that we've got to live in.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
This is The Intentional Investor right here on Epsilon Theory YouTube. This is a part deux, if you will. That's what I'm going to run with on this one. We've got the Ben-Hur of kicking a story with your Spurs, the Ben Affleck of not being goodwill hunting, but loving goodwill when it's on the hunt, and the Ben Kingsley of many a great Twitter list, which read into that Schindler's List dig however you like, but I mean it as one of the last great social media supporting actors of our time. Clear eyes, full hearts. I don't think we can lose today. Ben Hunt, welcome back to The Intentional Investor.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be back. And man, I just love this series that you've invented here. I really do. Portfolio of meaning.
Portfolio of meaning. There's a lot of stuff behind people. We're going to talk about the "It Was Never Going to Be Me" post that just came out. That was the inception of saying this is the right time to have this conversation. We're going to talk about what next for Epsilon Theory, Second Foundation Partners, and all the amazing stuff you have going on. But I got to connect it back a little bit to where we left off last time, which was right when this whole thing started. And I want to even go a little bit further back because I don't know how this didn't really come up in the first conversation, which by all means, scroll back to the beginning of this playlist, listen to the backstory, listen to what got Ben up to this point in time. I have to ask this first, like religion in the household. What did you grow up? Did you grow up religious? Mom and dad, you were going to church?
Oh, no, not at all. It's the funniest thing. So my dad was, oh my God, I still remember.
I'm blindsided you with this one, but I really want to know
the heads of everyone who is under the age of 60, or probably older, right? But my father, I remember he had a book by Bertrand Russell on the shelves, Why I Am Not a Christian. And so that's the household I grew up in. And keep in mind, my dad, both sides of my family, we're from North Alabama. I mean, we're in it, right?
You're in Jesus country. Yeah.
Oh boy, for sure. And yeah, my father wasn't having any of it. And my mother, she would sneak, me and my brother out for Sunday school when she could, right? So we'd go to the Unitarian church, which, for Sunday school at the Unitarian church, which is its own thing. But yeah, that was the household I grew up in. It's crazy stuff what you grew up with was a kid, because I was always so nervous and worried that we didn't go to church like the other families and the other kids. So I would wake up early so Saturday morning, of course, was cartoons, but Sunday morning were the religious shows. So I would wake up early. then I'd go into the living room and we had a black and white TV that my father had built out of a Heath kit. There's another one that'll take you back. Heath kit. And I'd watch the religious show. I mean, I'd watch Ernest Angley. I'd watch all those people because I felt like I needed to do that to keep my family safe. Because, you know, we weren't going to church, so I'd do my part by watching the religious shows. Yeah, I was an overly sensitive kid, I think, in that respect.
So where's when does...
Why did you ask about religion? I'm curious. Why did that come up?
Well, because I wanted to know, last time we talked about our shared mutual fascination with like Reader's Digest and the comic version adaptations of books. And, you know, I grew up going to church as two parents who didn't want to be Catholics and chose to be Protestants proactively, but it's also moving around as a kid and saying church was a shortcut to community to have friends in a new area. But that was my exposure to...
Did you guys move around a lot?
Not a lot, but enough. You know, my parents had me when my dad was still in grad school. So it was kind of like,
wow,
you know, they were young, and it was a way for the first couple of jobs till stuff settled in to like move around and test out how do we make friends in a community that's an hour, 2 hours from, you know, quote unquote home for both of them in two totally different parts of the state. So church was just always a part of what we did on weekends and then a part of community and charitable work and everything else. But that's how I learned all those Bible stories. And nowhere in your story did you tell me where you did. And yet it's like, I recognize all these stories when you tell them because of my upbringing, but I couldn't figure out where the hell you learned them.
Oh, yeah. So I would just devour all the Bible story books in the same way I would
the cartoon
devour
Bible.
all.
What's that? The cartoon Bible? I'm forgetting on what those were called. Like the kids' Bible, that's like the comic book version.
Kind of, yeah. I'm sure I did. I had so many. I had so many Bible story books growing up. In the same way that I had my, you know, Dolaire's Norse mythology books. Oh my God, I grew up on those.
Yeah, they're the best.
And then one thing was such a prominent thing growing up was that every week, multiple times a week, my dad would take me and my brother down to the Birmingham Public Library. So, you know, every week was a trip down to the big library downtown. And then during the week, you know, my mom would take us to the local library. So I always remember then bookstores opened up. So, you know, the whole notion of I remember when Barnes and Noble first opened up in Birmingham and the kind of revelation that was. But bookstores, so my dad, he always let me buy or check out any book. And he'd pay when we went to a bookstore, whatever the book was, it was, yeah, of course we'll get it. So I grew up in just this book world. And for me, it was always the stories. So the Birmingham Public Library, I think these were from, you know, the WPA programs where, you know, they paint the big murals on the walls and stuff. And so the Birmingham Public Library, I don't even know if that building is still around, but they had all the great storytellers from history. So there was Scheherazade up there, and there was, you know, a Bible person up there, you know, telling a story. And so they had all these great storytellers I still remember that mural that was all around the big central room. And that was my life, man. I just grew up reading every story I could get my hands on. And most of those I just devoured myths and legends. And in my family, at least from my dad's perspective, that was Bible stories. So I'd get all the Bible story books from all my other relatives who wanted me to read the Bible. And then my interest was always in just reading the stories. So yeah, I grew up knowing most of the stories.
Did you see them as just did you differentiate maybe because of your dad, or maybe this happens later in life where you start to say, these are just other myths and legends?
Great question. So growing up, I kind of, you read about the flood as the archetype, and you read about it in all these different cultures. I'll be totally honest with you. I saw it as another set of myths and legends.
Yeah.
And a big part of me still does. I mean, here's how it's evolved for me, which is that I now understand that Jesus Christ was the most radical and subversive person to ever, walk the earth, right? He and Socrates. I mean, they're the two most subversive people ever. And I didn't get that till a lot later, when I developed interest in power and politics and what does it mean to how a society organized. So I've got a new appreciation for the old stories, especially as they're found, both Old Testament and New Testament. I have a newfound appreciation for the stories of Exodus, of wandering in the desert. That's a big focus of mine right now. And then I also have such a newfound appreciation for the way in which, and particularly the New Testament, uses allegory as a way of speaking truth with a little t and a capital T in a world that, doesn't want you to speak that truth. So the allegories and the stories, to me, whether it's Jesus talking about being as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves, which is something that I write about in this most recent note, or whether it's about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is something I want to write about in the next note, that and the stories of Exodus. What does it mean to wander in the desert, where you don't know how long this is going to last, and you feel like you have been abandoned, right? The signposts are gone. How do you make sense of that? How do you keep your faith through that? Those are the stories where I feel just bursting to write and talk about these old stories. But yeah, when I was reading them as a kid, it was another set of myths and legends for me. It really was.
That's really, really interesting to see how you explored that growing up. So we made it up in the last conversation. We got up to sort of the beginning of Epsilon Theory, and you writing it. And I want to talk about this because you start it, you're at Salian, and it's markets focused at first, or that's at least the way it starts to feel. It's more markets linked, I'm going to say. What was the original idea for sort of the content, besides your bursting at the seams and your wife saying, like, go ahead, dear, go.
Yeah, that's right.
Better do something about that then,
that's
or whatever
nice.
she
That's
said.
nice.
Yeah, that's nice.
You should do that. So it was before Salient. So it was when I was, I wound down
On your own.
our hedge fund, right? And so it was like, okay, what the hell? What am I doing? And I've always been consumed with trying to figure out, thinking of markets as a puzzle. It's like, so many of the people think, I'd suspect that the vast majority of the people listening to this podcast who've been in markets in a professional sense, they know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to crack the code. You want to crack the code. That's what it is. It's a big puzzle. It's a big game. You're going to crack the code. And there are a million different ways that people try to do that. And I thought, okay, I've got something is going on that the typical code cracking approaches, the kind of not what I call naive and induction. And we don't want to get all into all that, how do you crack codes? But I just had to try to figure it. I was trying to figure it out. How do markets work? So it was very much markets focused and focused on the power of storytelling in markets as the most important thing. I don't know if we talked about this before, but I started, I think, as most people in markets deal with it professionally start, we think, okay, well, yeah, it's stories in the short term, but it's fundamentals, medium to long term. I call it being a weak form narrativist. And then I became a semi-strong narrativist. But, well, actually, it's stories in a deeper and more fundamental way than I thought, and it lasts longer, et cetera. But still, there's a reality beneath the story. And when I started writing Epsilon Theory, I'd gotten to the point where now I'm a strong form narrativist. It's turtles all the way down. It's stories all the way down. And that was the perspective that I wrote from. But it was still ultimately trying to crack the code. It was.
As you're going through that, is that the beginning of the writing process, sort of like uncovering that weak form narrativist to strong form? Does that happen at the beginning of the writing, or did that already happen by the time you start writing?
I'm pausing just because I'm replaying it in my own mind, right? And there's a tendency when you replay it in your own mind to mythologize it. It's the stories
Yeah.
we tell ourselves are the most
Right.
important ones. I did not have it all figured out for sure, but and this is how Epsilon Theory evolves. I started writing about, more than markets, was that as I grew comfortable with the notion of its stories all the way down, this is the human thing too. You find things that support the view of where you're going. But I started finding things that I hadn't been looking for. So the trail of breadcrumbs that led me to the role of story, is, rediscovering Joseph Campbell. And, I'd been in, again, something a lot of your listeners are going to be very familiar with. When you're managing other people's money, man, there's no, your brain's got to be focused on that, right? There's no time or no, it's not right, honestly, to divert yourself from managing other people's money. You're entrusted with something really important there. And so looking back on it now, what I realize is that being able to step back from I'll say this when I mean it, the sacred duty when you are entrusted with managing other people's money, that fiduciary, trust, to once you remove yourself from that, then you have the luxury to open up your eyes and start looking around. And so I felt like scales fell from my eyes, not in the religious sense, not on the road to Damascus sense, but the scales fell from my eyes for the illusion of news and fundamentals when really it's story all the way down. And that's, again, it was first happened for me in markets, and then in politics, and then on, just the most fundamental level of who are we as humans and what's it all about? So all these things start coming back into focus through Epsilon Theory. Every note I write, I end up in a very different place than where I started. That, without exception, every note I've written, I end up in a different place. The act of writing changes your views and where you are. That is true on the meta sense as well. It's true on the fractal sense as well. That the act of writing now for the last 13 years, I am in a very different place than when I started. So it's fascinating that the act of creation through using words, and I bet this is true for actors. I bet this is true for any sort of creative effort, but I think it's most pronounced with writing because I think it's the purest form of that linguistic of using the words. You end up in a different place than when you start, and the act itself puts you in a different place than when you started the act itself.
Outsider looking in, with that excavation, this is also where we start to see things from your past come into that work. Like, this is where the game theory was always there, but applying it to solving now higher and higher layers of the puzzle, it feels like that really started to evolve, where you started to just sort of excavate other parts of your past and bring it into this writing. Probably you're trying to wrestle with solving them and not being constrained by the fiduciary obligation to go pick a short and hedge out whatever risks.
Exactly. And we all have to balance the act of exploring and creating with, paying the bills. So we need to stay in the business and need to do some of the, all right, let's work on your asset allocation models and stuff. And I'm making kind of a funny voice for that because we're all in the same business, right? We know what that is. And that's not to denigrate. And I shouldn't have used the funny voice because it's not to denigrate. It's crucially important. And there is a level of trust and faith, and it's why it's well compensated. It's why we do it. And it's important even beyond that. So I apologize for the funny voice, but I was trying to use it as a way of distinguishing kind of, gosh, I sound like I'm a competitor of The Bachelor, the journey, here, but there is a journey, right? And so it starts, as you're saying, with, all right, I've got things from your eclectic past, and you say, oh, well, that's important to bring in here. But what's changed me over time is just the realizing that the storytelling essence goes so deep, and that there is another dimension. I really believe this now, and this gets all woo, but there is a dimension of story. This is the semantic layer of information, the meaning, and it's organized in humans or expressed in humans through language, through this, which is like a virus that has infected the human animal and changed our brains and changed everything about us. And it's a way of accessing this layer of information and meaning. So I don't know, that all sounds very, again, woo, but it's changed my relationship with the world. It's changed as I see things develop in the world, politically, socially, and markets. It's changed the way I want to interact with that. And recently it's what I bring from my history and my past into the writing has made me realize that there are things that I don't want to talk about publicly, because we are in a different world. I think it's a world that is now unsafe to talk about some things publicly, politics in particular. And I'm trying to recalibrate, because I'm feeling the tick-tock of my own story and my own storytelling ability. How do I apply that in the way that, makes me a human being? I know this all sounds very woo here. I suspect maybe not to you, but I think to a lot of people. But what that really means is I think I've got an ability to channel words to show people things And I want to use that in a way to show people in smaller communities rather than the big public facing approach. So that's kind of how I'm changing in the way that I write.
Inside of this piece, and I'm jumping to it because I think it links back. So in this, it was never going to be me piece out now on Epsilon Theory. You put this contrast between great power and good power. Yeah, you use this a number of times throughout the piece to sort of highlight this contrast, this point, this evolution. And I think it takes us up to this point that you were just making, not in the meta layer of language piece, but just in stuff you felt like you could comment on and why it was necessary for you to comment on evolved alongside you. If you think about the great power versus a good power and what you felt like writing about and how you felt like communicating it over the arc of more than a decade of Epsilon Theory, how do you think about that?
Well, so the notion of being a great power is this notion of effectiveness, of power for power's sake. And I've pursued that as we all do in our own lives and our own efforts. So a big part of the effort with writing Epsilon Theory was to get a larger and larger public voice. And I'm a lot less interested in that now, because I find, again, it is this notion of TikTok. There are things that I want to say that are separate from being effective, right? I believe pretty strongly that the course of the world is, for the medium term at least, set on this downward path. And I know that sounds like grumpy grandpa, and you've always that you darn kids, right? But it's not the darn kids. It's the people, a lot of whom are older than I am, right? Who are maximizing their power in this world, power for power's sake. It's not associated with a particular political party, and it is instantiated in the current politics we have to a exquisite degree. So that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. And for me personally, because there is more that I want to say, I feel like publicly I need to say it in code. I think that that's actually where it can be most effective. And I also want to talk publicly about things that I think are more important, which are the stories, right? The story I want to tell about myself for the next 20 years is a story of carrying the fire forward for future generations. That's the old story I want to manifest in myself. And it's the story that Cormac McCarthy ends No Country for Old Men, because I'm increasingly feeling that our country is no country for old men. And not that I'm old, but I'm 60 years old, so I'm feeling it. I'm feeling that TikTok. And so my role is, as that book ends, in a dream, the father, takes the fire, he carries the fire forward for the campsite ahead. And that's how I feel about my own personal role. And so how do you carry the fire forward? It's not by arguing about politics on Twitter with rando MAGA dude X. As much as I kind of get my jollies doing that, I don't have time. I don't have time for that. And so I'm not going to do it. I don't think it's safe, and I don't think it's effective for the story I want to tell about myself. I mean, I wanted to have this conversation with you, Matt, because it was kind of a big thing for me to say, you know what, I get myself worked up and I write the stuff, top-down stuff about politics. I don't feel like you've ever gone down that path, Matt. And I'm envious of that. So it's made a difference kind of seeing you, Matt, because you say things that, we don't talk about politics and you don't write about politics, but your humanity comes out in what you're talking about. So I feel like the act of writing is a political act. It really is.
Be very subversive all the way around.
Is to be subversive, right?
Yes.
But in what subversiveness should be, right? Which is that Jesus Christ and Socrates model of what subversion is.
You define great effectiveness, power for power's sake. Take a minute, define good, the contrast. I think you did right there in the Cormac McCarthy story, but I want you to really.
I do. I mean, that's the particular good that I want to, that I feel like I can contribute to. So so I do think there is a particular notion of the good, and it is, we used to talk about it when these words had meaning. We used to talk about small L liberal and small c conservative. Those words don't have meaning anymore, so I don't like to use them. But it is the two core things, Jesus and Socrates. Socrates, know thyself. So that's in Friday Night Lights terms, that's clear eyes, especially clear eyes about yourself, turned inwards. So know thyself. And Jesus, love thy neighbor as you love thyself. It's love, it's empathy. So those are the two great and subversive, just enormously subversive stories of, I was going to say of the West, but those stories are not just of the West. So if you look at the subversive stories of every old religion, every old culture, I think it really boils down to those two things: know thyself and love thy neighbor. Profoundly difficult to do. They're subversive because they undermine. That's what subversion is. It's an undermining. They undermine the instruments of power for power's sake. And the hard part for all of us is we've got to live in the world as it is, right? Which is a world of power and money for power and money's sake. But how do we maintain the fire of knowing thyself and loving thy neighbor? Socrates and Jesus, who were both killed, by the way, for their message. Then that's what I mean by it's not safe. It ain't safe to give these messages, right? Because if you, and this is what Jesus said, you want to be wise as serpents, right? Know thyself, clear eyes, but harmless as doves, which ultimately he wasn't. And that's why I say it's not safe to write overtly about politics. It may not be safe to write covertly about politics. I don't know. I think that's still okay. But both Socrates and Jesus were killed by the state for their very subversive messages. That is not lost on me.
So I can't say that this was a Zeigler family household tradition. but I think it connects to your question about why I don't like to publicly write or talk or get into this fray. And it's mostly because I look at it as, and I've said this, and we've talked a lot online and offline, publicly and privately about this, where to me, a lot of it is just, it's the rules of fandom.
Mhm.
And it's just, you're a fan of this thing and great for the game, go out and root for your team. But then after the game, go enjoy a hot dog at the hot dog stand. Easter Sunday in my house, we'd go to church, we'd do the normal stuff or whatever. Many an Easter weekend in my house, we would also watch The Life of Brian.
Mhm.
And I think it's really important, and it was really important for me growing up watching Monty Python, growing up with stuff like this, to basically say, oh, this is a team. We can take this really, really seriously, and we can take this stuff. But what actually counts is the underlying values to this stuff. It's something I've become increasingly aware of, especially, I would say, in the last 8 years of my life, and certainly in the last, and I'm not using that for any political bookends, but it just seems that's my migration of more and more capturing stuff in public and then being more online or present in the world in a way that I couldn't have been 10 years ago. Really hyperdrive the last 2.5 years. Inside of that, it's like, what's the upside of even saying you root for a team when you don't really care about the team at the front level? You care about fans on both sides. And that's been my life as an investor, allocator, all the things that I do for work, because it's, I'm going to get the text from the friend who's really excited that they're at the event at Mar-a-Lago. And then I'm going to get the text from the other friend who's protesting in New York. And all I want is to preserve the friendship, because I don't really care about the other things. I want to go to church on Easter Sunday and then go home and sing Always Look on the Bright Side of Life with my brothers and laugh about Brian on the cross.
Can I say, so, I grew up without the church environment. Every Easter, my brother and I, and my father too, we would watch the 10 Commandments. Great. So it was the reverse of what you're describing. You'd go to Sunday morning church and you come and watch Life of Brian. We would forget Sunday morning church, but we'd watch, Charlton Heston and the 10 Commandments, and it's a long movie, but I'd watch the whole thing. I mean, I know so much of that movie.
To this day,
loved it.
I will stop if that movie, I guess nothing's on TV anymore because everything's streaming,
Right.
but that's,
Right.
My wife just
If that's
reminded
on?
me, like 2 years ago, we watched that on her birthday. She was like, why did we do that? Because we both watched it growing up a million times. And it holds a weird special place, even though it's 5 hours long. And
it is a very special place, right? So it's finding that special place of community, whether it's a church, right? Whether it's watching Life of Brian, whether it's watching the 10 Commandments, whether it's, still being able to be that bridge between the people on two different political teams. Yeah, I hear, I very much hear you. I think, Matt, the other thing for me though, is that I do feel like, tightening the circle a little bit about, because it's wonderful that you have actual friends who are in the different camps. Part of kind of being more out there and being more public over the last, 10 years or so. And you're going to experience this too, because your public facingness is expanding a ton, Matt. It's just going to get bigger. But I'm out there to a degree now where I'm not going to say I don't know who my friends are, because I know who my friends are, but there is this kind of gray area where, are they friends? All right. Are they thinking of me in an instrumental fashion or in an intrinsic fashion? What am I to people? And it's a hard thing to talk about, because I know what I am to my family and my old friends. I'm just bent, right? Warts and all. And I don't know what I am to a lot of people who I've gotten to know in the last, I'll call it 10 years. I don't know who I am to them. And that's a weird place to be. I don't know how else to describe it except that it's a weird place to be.
With, we've had a number of people ask about breaking news and bringing it back. And one of the things that we had said privately that I want to say out loud was, I never wanted that to be, we get the biggest responses to like saying something that would get you upset.
Yeah.
It's like, what in the name of content is you take somebody that you respect their opinion and you try to wind them up and get them upset because that gets more views.
It does. It sure
Like
does.
that was a weird thing to see firsthand and think about what's actually the value if it's just to see what can get somebody the most mad or fired up. Because then that part doesn't necessarily contribute to the right part of the discourse and the right part of the small community building. This is a delicate line that we're all walking. And I know you're examining this right now too, with how do you both identify who needs to be in that circle around you for safety and also for giving you the life and the creative work that you want, but also to be in service of those communities in ways that's, you have to be healthy on all fronts in how you show up.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it, Matt? Because there's no way I would have built whatever audience I've got without being angry and engaged and the like. Because I'll tell you, me sitting here talking about Jesus and Socrates, that ain't going to do numbers. That will not do numbers.
Others have tried, Ben.
Yeah, others have tried, right? But it just doesn't do numbers. And I know, I've got friends who do podcast and do writing about, good news stuff. And it's a pebble in the pond and it's a little ripple and then it just goes away. And what sells is what sells. It's not even what sells, right? What engages with people is the argument, the anger, and I don't mind doing that. In fact, I enjoy it from an ego perspective. I really do. I don't think that sort of engagement, like I say, is safe anymore. I really don't. And I'm trying to get past the ego piece of this, right? Which you enjoy the attention, which that brings in. That's what I mean by engagement. It's attention.
Right.
I enjoy it. I love being on stage. Anyway, I'm trying to get past that. But it's hard, man. It's hard.
Yeah, it's a different version of quitting the junk, quitting the dopamine, quitting the hits of that stuff, and then actually asking a fundamental Epsilon Theory question, like who I am is not necessarily like what I do. Separating our identity from this stuff and redeclaring what you want. So if there's a retreat from public discourse about this stuff, because this is a big part of this note. A retreat from public discourse is not saying I'm retreating from the discourse. It's just saying I want to approach this in a new way or with some new methods. Yes. What are you hoping to get out of what you do next with how you approach this?
So what does not come across in the anger and the engagement that stokes the ego is actually an optimism for words, an optimism for words and our new tools for understanding words with generative AI. And so I want to write about that and want to talk about the technology. I want to help people see what I've seen, which is this dimension of the universe that isn't space-time, right? It's not It's not the boundaries of matter, and it's not the one-way arrow of time. It is the quantum timelessness, boundaryless nature of meaning. And it's accessible for humans through, I think, principally through love and empathy, which are, I think, the most powerful expressions of meaning that humans can touch, right? So my goal is to tell that story in an entertaining, engaging way without getting angry and without making myself a target, because it is a very subversive message to say that that is actually one of the substrates of reality is, love and empathy.
Do you think, and whether it's easier to work these things out, I almost think about you have to retreat, kind of like at the beginning of writing the Epsilon Theory stuff. You have to retreat to like a smaller group to figure out how to really retool that messaging. Do you feel like there's some retooling?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
Okay.
The secret, I'll tell you, the secret of writing, and it's true for your voice and it's true for Epsilon Theory, is if you start writing for an audience for what you think will be effective, you've lost.
Exactly.
You're done. It ain't going to work. Right. And this has been the mistake of so many, both individual writers, but also political parties, that we must speak to the youth by, using the language they understand. And give me a fucking break, right? It's got to be your voice, and you got to say it. And maybe it'll resonate and maybe it won't. I think you've got a gift, Matt. I think I've got a gift for saying the things we want to say in our voice, and it clicks with people. It's all it is. But so I don't want to retool. What I want to do is wean myself off the dopamine hits of the anger engagements. And it's proving to be quite difficult. I don't mind telling you, it's hard, because it's just like you get served up a layup, and like,
They just
here's a
wanna give it to
softball
you.
down, and I just, so it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Because I sometimes I can't help myself, but damn it, I want to do better, because there's not a lot of time. There's never enough time, but particularly now, I don't think there's enough time. And I'm feeling the pressure of time from the bottom up, from me getting older, and I'm feeling the pressure of time from what's happening in our society, which is the embrace of the pursuit of power for power's sake through a marriage of the state and the corporation. We have a word for that. It begins with an F. It is fascism in the traditional sense. And don't give me you're comparing Trump to Hitler. I'm not. I'm honestly not. I'm just telling you that is the word for the marriage of corporate interest and state interest in the pursuit of power for power's sake. That's just the word, right? It has a form, and it takes a path. It's a path that humans have been going down for thousands of years. The reaction to that is, like Jesus said, you don't join the other political party, right? You become as harmless as a dove, right, as best you can. And if you're really good at telling the story, it doesn't matter anyway. But I really think that's the story. And that what we can try to achieve is to try to take into the future the story of an autonomy of mind and a community of spirit. That's it, brother. But man, sometimes that softball just comes up here and I just want to.
It's only human. It's only human. I think this is really important. Whether you're calling it the Great Ravine as you do, or we look at this and back to I love the idea of just, carrying the fire to the next encampment. You're still an optimist. Like I
Very,
know this from
very, very
my
much so.
engaging with you on this stuff. And that was another piece where this piece is not a Ben throwing in the towel piece. This is Ben shifting tactics on saying, I do see another side of this, and I want to make sure I'm there and contributing to the climb back out of this.
Yes,
How
please.
how do you see that?
Yeah, well, just the way you said it, and it. There is we call them semantic signatures, these story arcs, these lines, and so there's this prominent storyline that what you need to do, that the good is to speak truth to power. That and what I'm trying to say is there's a much older story, the Bible story of being wise as serpents, harmless as doves. That what that means in practice is you tighten your circle, you watch your mouth in public, you help your circle, right? Does that mean with money? Yes, it does. Does that mean with sanctuary? Whatever that means to you? Yes, it does. It means you don't rat. That's a big one. You don't rat. This is how humans have survived and ultimately thrived in these situations for thousands of years. Just what I described. It's never been more important to find your pack. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I think I've got a good pack. I think you've got a good pack, Matt. I think we're both in each other's pack. And that's the message. So it's the focus then has to be on working actively for your pack. Publicly, what I want to do is I want to encourage pack finding and communication between packs. And that means oftentimes speaking in code publicly. It definitely doesn't mean, it definitely means not calling attention to yourself as I've been wont to do in the past. That's what it means.
And I think there's a profound importance in that, because that's not calling attention to yourself is also related to the ego tied to that.
Yes. Oh my God. It's so hard for me not to call attention to myself because I love the attention placed on myself.
And that's kind of a hard thing to model no matter what layer in the public sphere you're in. I mean, that's half the problem we see here, right? Is like, we want to bundle everything together. We want to have this all stuff be perfect because we just want it to feed the ego, feed the ego, feed the ego.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a great shortage of people who are like, I would just rather be volunteering at the shelter. And you need a mix of both. You can't just have all the one and all the other. It's
because I hear this like, yes, you should. Yeah, it's the volunteering at the shelter, and I'm not a volunteering at the shelter guy. I'm just going to be out there. I'm not a volunteering at the shelter guy. I'm yeah, I don't know how to say it other than that. I mean, of course I will volunteer at the shelter. But, and it is a but, it's not an and, it's a but it's not hooey. Know thyself, right? I am not a volunteer at the shelter guy. What I am, and I say this from a distance, from a critical distance. What I am is a herald, and I'm in a little bit of, you're the main character. No, but I'm not the guy, right? I'm not. I am the announcer before the guy. right? And I don't mean a guy in the sense of a human being, right? What I mean is what I am is a herald. I'm I think I can be someone who can kind of walk between two worlds, right? This semantic world of meaning and the real world that we've got to live in. So I'm not the guy, but I'm an announcer or herald of the guy who's not a guy. I hope that made some sense. It probably didn't. It was probably just seemed very woo and very babbly, but I'm not the guy who volunteers at the shelter. And that's okay. And I've come to grips with that.
It's okay because it requires layers of community to do that. We can't all just be the guy who's the right person to volunteer at the
Correct.
shelter. Like, this is just a part of it. The person who can help give voice to the thing or spread the word in different ways, or even notice which shelter needs help with the resources, then somebody else can help come in and go, let me help organize, direct, whatever this is. There's a beautiful free market component that's not just mercenary inside of this. If you could understand, well, we can start understanding this and having dialogue around it, because different people have different skills.
Yes,
that's part of it.
And it's even more than skills, right? Different people is know thyself. Who are you? And be true to that, not in a new agey sense. Oh, I've got to be true to myself. That's the path to. It's just another way of expressing ego, honestly, a lot of times when it goes down that. But there is an economy of good. There is an economy where good is expressed in being true, in that notion of being true to yourself, in the true sense, in the Aristotelian sense. You keep coming back to whether it's Socrates or Aristotle or Jesus. We're no smarter and no wiser today than we were 2,500 years ago. We're no dumber, but it's still us, right?
Right.
And it is those old stories that are the way through today. But yeah, I feel like I'm finally getting to recognize who I am, and warts and all. And I've been lucky to find people who recognize, who want to be part of my pack and will let me into their pack, recognizing who I am, warts and all. And LFG, let's fucking go.
I'll into that. I got a couple of notes, so I want you to respond.
Okay, good. Yeah.
We got to land on something fun here with this. I loved at the beginning. I just love knowing this, that your dad had Bertrand Russell on the shelf, and you guys.
Isn't that wild? Yeah.
That's fantastic. I have to ask, did you read? I think it was Pullman. It was the Good Jesus and the Scoundrel Christ. Did you read this book, The Good Man Jesus?
No. I never read most of these books, right? I keep books around as totems, right? They're objects for me.
I'm
exaggerating, but no,
I understand. It's a shorter, I think it was a shorter book, came out 15-ish years ago, and it basically reimagines the story of Jesus, but it's one, if I remember correctly, it's two brothers. There's a brother named Jesus and a brother named Christ, and the one is the good person and the other one is the scoundrel.
Oh, neat.
And it's probably one of the most interesting dissections of the characters, because for every myth, there's an anti-myth. For every character, or every hero, there's an anti-hero. And it's sort of when you start to understand the nuance, you understand the core messaging of it, because it's just, the story as this navigates. It's just like having Wicked being the biggest thing ever. And it's oh yeah, let's flip some of the story on its head and give you a piece so you can understand maybe you don't hate that character after all.
Right.
There's not a lot of that in the discourse right now of that type.
Well, and that is that's at the core of subversion, right? Where you
Right.
flip a story around in a safe way, right? In a counterfactual and imaginary way. So that, to me, that's what good art does, right? It flips a story around, so it gives you a different lens, and there's often a click. So that's what subversion is. That sounds like a good subversive book.
Good subversive book. Short stories and just writing, how it becomes the foundation. The act of writing, how it changes you and it changes your views. Like that's also subversive too, because you're unpacking your own thoughts in those reflections. You said you start a piece and you end in a place you never would have expected
Always.
you ended. Always.
And that doesn't happen if you're writing to an audience, to try to convince an audience, right? If you're writing for an audience, you don't change.
Because then you know where you're going to land, right?
You got it.
And that's another way of saying there will still be Epsilon Theory notes, just not once.
Yes, for sure. Oh my God. Yes. Plenty.
I want you to unpack this again. You said it a bunch of times throughout the conversation. You related the know thyself teaching to clear eyes and the love thy neighbor part to indirectly or directly to the full hearts, and the marrying of those two, the Jesus and the Socratic.
Mm-hmm.
Have you written about that specifically, or have you talked much about this
Yeah.
publicly specifically?
Yeah, I have.
It was back
I
in the
have.
original
When I
Clear
write,
Eyes, Full
there's
Hearts.
there's a note called "This is my introduction to the narrative and metaverse." That's the note where I write
Okay.
specifically.
Yeah. I want to point people back at that, because I think that's also
That's a great idea.
the underpinnings of of subversive languaging, where you're not trying to just go pick a fight.
Yeah. Man, everyone says they want the nice Ben. They want Ben to write about, make, protect, teach. And that is what I'm going to write about. And I'm just telling you right now, it's not true. Right. They actually want the angry. It's not what most people want, but I don't care, because that's what I'm going to be writing about.
Not what most people want is also, though, not what no people want. And that's a hard thing to reconcile once you've got to a certain size.
What my pack needs is for me to write about, make, protect, teach. So that's what I'm going to do, because that's what they and I need.
You talked about the boundarylessness of meaning of or between love and empathy. This boundarylessness of meaning. And maybe say more for a minute. What is AI, or what is the semantic universe in the way you're studying it, with just the watershed moment of tools that we now have at our disposal? What is that doing for you, for just helping expose the boundarylessness of how this connects to us?
So ideas, stories, Matt, they are as alive as you and I. And they live in this dimension of meaning and language. It is physically instantiated in 8 billion human brains with, 100 billion neurons each. So there is a physical instantiation of this. This exists in the world of space and time. It's just a distributed network of mind. And this is that note too about I'm not asking people to believe that ideas, they're alive in the same way that a virus is alive. We believe that life exists on a invisible world of microscopy. That on my fingernail there are living creatures right now. We all believe that. I'm asking people to believe that there is this other invisible world of semantics where ideas also live. That's what I'm saying more about it. Yeah. Look, I've got to work on it. I've got to write a new manifesto. I got to write a new thing, right? And that's what I'm going to do. So it's time. It's time. It's been 13 years since the last one, and a manifesto is a very ego-forward thing to say. I'm writing a manifesto. So I get to satisfy the ego bit by calling it a new manifesto and maybe write about something that can carry the fire forward a bit.
Well, I'm all for the 13-year manifesto and in honor of the things on the cutting room floor, because I'm thinking about the weight through the Great Ravine and the optimism on the other side of this thing. On the cutting room floor from the intro, not just was my attempt at parodying the Beach Boys with "Let's go to serfdom now," but also was this idea that now is making so much sense to me, which was the old Heinz ketchup slogan. So Heinz basically used to say, "The best things come to those who wait." But do you know what the Hunt's ketchup slogan was?
We were a Hunt's family, of course.
Well,
in the grocery
They
store.
didn't. So they didn't really have a.
Was it Heinz? So who had the Carly Simon song "Anticipation"? That must have been Heinz, right?
It had to be Heinz. The whole thing was built around good things come to those who wait, and then the mock thing, almost like the Hertz rental car level stuff for Hunt's, was sorry they're out of Heinz, but
okay.
I mean it's kind of
That's pretty
fitting.
good.
It's kind of fitting. So seeing past this environment, seeing past this long now, knowing that your pack will get you through,
Mhm.
and that's all the more reason you have to go out, you have to find them, you have to hold on to them. I mean, we've said it before, we'll say it again. Buckle up, honeys.
Buckle up,
Ben.
honeys.
It's been a great pleasure. You're truly an intentional investor.
I love you, Matt. Thank you.
Love you too, Ben. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at Epsilon Theory on Twitter.